Hello, I just want to talk to you about how you can now create custom aspects via the Shodo IDE, at least if you've got version 7.6 or above. Typically, when you want to do some custom data capture against a work item, you will use Form Builder. And Form Builder is adequate. It can do some relatively complicated things like visible ifs and some dependencies between different components and stuff. But anything that goes outside of those boundaries needs to be a little bit more complicated. It requires you adding a custom aspect definition in C# code at the moment. Now, that means delving into C# code. It also means going through our code review process to actually sign your plugin before you're able to install it and things like that. Now, in version 8, we're going to have a whole new Form Builder concept that's going to make all of that much easier, but that's a while off yet. So for now, we've added this thing called the IDE widget aspect adapter that will let you create your own aspects in the IDE and hook them up to data that's being loaded and saved via the add edit work item blade. So let's take a quick look what I'm actually talking about. If I sign into Shodo and I'll go to one of my work items, and anywhere where you edit a work item, so for example editing the actual matter in this case, all of these things, all of these data captures, the ribbon, these nav bars at the bottom, these fields, these are all being driven by what we call aspects. You compose them onto the form, and then at runtime it renders all of those aspects to you. Now, if you want to do custom data capture, then typically you'll use a form builder. So if I go and have a look at creating a task, let's create a basic task. On here I have the usual task aspect stuff, tags, who it's assigned to, the due date and all that kind of stuff, but I've also got this risk form that allows me to capture a risk and a probability. Now, if I wanted to do something more complicated with this, this is standard form builder, but if I wanted this to basically make a calculation between these two fields and then show me a red message box or something if the risk is too high, maybe prevent me from saving the task if the risk is too high and things like that, then I have to create one of these custom aspects, and then I'm into C# code. But this IDE aspect adapter widget will let you do that directly from the Shodo IDE. Now, I'm not going to focus too much on code. I'm going to leave that to you. I've got some pre-built stuff that I'm going to show you. We're going to do two things. We're going to create a custom aspect that will allow us to visualize this due date, maybe with a dramatic countdown timer or something like that. And then we're also going to take this risk form and we're going to change that to use sliders for the capture, but then also do a calculation that says if it exceeds a certain threshold of risk times by probability is more than, I don't know, 50, we're going to prevent the task from actually being saved. So let's just change this view so I'm on the task list, and we'll duplicate the tab and we'll go and have a look in the IDE. I've already created these already. I've not attached them to anything yet, so I'm just going to walk you through the code rather than write it live because I don't want this to be a 1-hour video. Okay, so we're going to the developer IDE, just clean up behind myself. I've got two widgets that are already scaffolded here that are custom aspects. Before I drill into those though, I'll tell you about the scaffolding itself. So if you want to create a new aspect via the IDE, just like everything else where we provide a way to create all of the boilerplate, we now have this new widget aspect widget scaffold, and if we click that and just give it a name, we now get all of the code that's necessary to create an aspect widget. I'll walk you through some of the differences between this and the standard widget. First of all is in the manifest for the widget itself. We've always had these allowing portal and allowing Shodo portal designer flags, but we've now got this extra one that says this is specifically a widget that can be used as an aspect within the aspect editor. The rest is all the same, so we've got things like title, icon, description, categories, all that kind of stuff. If it's configurable, you would set this to true and give it a default configuration that the user is then able to change. And if it's not a configurable thing, we're not going to pass parameters into the widget, then the set is configurable to false. The rest is all the same. It references files from the IDE. So we've got the CSS file, the HTML file, and the JavaScript model file. Just drilling into the actual model itself, there's some differences here between this and a traditional widget. First of all, you're always passed this host object that contains the current model. The model is the data that is being edited as part of the wider add edit work item blade. So in there you can technically drill into it to go and find all the different pieces of aspect data and hook into that. The only thing to be aware of there is that the model is not actually observable in the add edit work item blade. So that means you have to take copies of the data, you have to pick up on when that data changes yourself, but typically that's not going to be a problem. What you're usually going to be writing these widgets for is as a replacement for a single form builder. So just like we've got the risk and probability, I'm going to replace that entire form builder. I'm still going to load and save that data, but I'm going to replace the UI for it in its entirety. So the fact that the underlying model is not observable doesn't really make much difference. The next lot of differences are to do with how it hooks into the lifecycle both of the widget and of the aspect framework. So from the widget framework point of view, you've got the same methods that you have on all widgets. You've got the load and bind method and the onDestroy method. So obviously onDestroy is where you clean up after yourself. If you create subscriptions to things or anything else that's persistent, you would need to clean that up on the onDestroy method. The load and bind is when the widget is being created, the model is now available, and it's asking you to go and load any data that you need to actually hydrate your model and update your UI. So that's standard as well. The ones that are not standard, these are specific to just the aspect framework. So this is because we're plumbing straight into the aspect blade, and the IDE adapter aspect is going to call these methods on your widget at the appropriate times in the life cycle of a traditional aspect. So on before save gets called, it goes around all of the widgets that are available before it's going to construct the model that's to be saved. So that's on before save. On save is to go and actually hydrate the model ready for poking into the API. So it's at that point in on save where you would update the model if you're going to save anything. On after save is called when the actual API call has been made, the data has been persisted and confirmed. Then you can add additional code to run after the save is completed. So this might be go and call external APIs. Now that we have an ID, go and do something with that ID and things like that. And then the last one is on reload, which the aspect framework will call whenever it needs your aspect to basically refresh itself entirely. And again, it'll pass you in a copy of the model as it stands at that point in time. The rest is all very standard, so the HTML template is standard. There's nothing special in there, and CSS is CSS. Nothing really to say about that. So let's delete that and let's go and look at a worked example. So the first thing that I'm going to do is we're going to install a custom aspect that's going to visualize this due date. So we're going to show some messages about a countdown if it's within 60 seconds, or a human readable format that says this task is due within a couple of days, or things like that. And in true Blue Peter fashion, we've got this aspect due date visualizer ready to go. So I've got my manifest, which has got all the details filled in. It's just going to have the name of due date visualizer. We've also got the model file, and there's perhaps a couple of things to point out here. So we're taking in the host parameters as normal, where we get given the underlying model reference, the blade in which this aspect is going to get hosted, and then a flag as to whether or not the input should be enabled or not. So you can sometimes open a work item where you've got read permission but you don't have update permission. If that's the case, then enabled will be false at the point where this is created, and you should honor that. So don't allow people to actually edit the data, put the form in read-only mode effectively if that enabled is false. We're then creating a couple of properties for our model. We're going to have a property for when the due date is, which we're going to dip into a different aspect that's on the blade to find that in a sec, and also an observable that is going to tick over what the current time is. We're then going to have a calculated field that says how many milliseconds have we got remaining, which we're using moment to calculate that difference just by taking the due date and taking away the current date. Obviously, if the current date is after the due date, that's going to be a negative number, otherwise it's going to be positive and it's going to be represented as milliseconds. Then we're going to calculate based upon that how many milliseconds are remaining, what our CSS needs to be. So we're going to show certain things in red, certain things in green, depending upon how much time's left. So if it's overdue, if it's due within the next 60 seconds, or whether it's due within the hour, or whether we've got plenty of time left. And similarly, we're going to have a message that does something similar, says time's up if it's overdue. Starts counting down in seconds if it's less than 60 seconds, so we get a dramatic timer. And then otherwise it's going to say you still have 2 minutes left. We're using humanize for that, so we just take the current duration that we've calculated, put it into moment, and then humanize it, and it will give us a human readable format for how much time's left. Then we set up a timer that ticks every 1 second, that just updates that self.now property to whatever the current date and time is. And then we create a subscription. Now, I said before that the underlying aspect model isn't observable, so you can't just subscribe to changes on it. But there are certain parts of the model that raise events, one of which is the due date being changed. So I can subscribe into that due date changed event, and I'll get notified whenever it's updated, and I just take the value that it's been updated to and push it into my self.due model property. Then, because we've created a timer, which is a persistent thing, and a subscription, which is also a globally persistent thing, we have to override on destroy, where we just clean up that timer and we dispose of our subscriptions. In terms of the HTML for this then, we've just got a very simple widget Chrome that's got a container that's going to have our custom CSS class against it, with a div inside of that that's got the message. And the CSS, I'm not really talking about this too much, but it's just applying a style to make it look pretty, and then setting colors based upon whether it's whether you've got time left, whether it's due within the hour, due now, or overdue. And I've just added a little flashing thing on the due now just to make everybody crazy, which will flash between kind of like a pinky purple and a red color every 1 second as it's counting down, just for a bit of drama. Okay, so now that I've got my actual aspect widget created, I need to attach it, and I'm going to attach it to task. So we do that via the modeler. I'll just open another tab in here. And we'll go to the work type modeler and we'll find task, and we'll go into aspects. Okay, so I'm going to add my new custom aspect into this top zone just below that custom risk form that I've got attached so far. Now, you might be thinking I'd be looking for the due date aspect here because that's what we've created in the IDE, but it's not. That's a widget that we've created in the IDE. What we need to use here is the IDE widget adapter. So this is the aspect part, the bit that lives in C# land, that is then created by us to allow it to load a widget from the IDE. So we select the IDE widget adapter and we'll configure it. The title is just for the admin UI, so this will be the due visualization. And then the widget that we want to load is the due date visualizer. Now, before, when I showed you the manifest, there was that new flag that said that it could be used as an aspect. This will only show you things that have that flag set to true. So if you've got 100 widgets in your IDE, it will still only show you the ones that you've explicitly said can be used as an aspect. So we'll select the due date visualizer, we'll confirm that, we'll save and close. Only apply it to task, and now in theory if we go over here and create a new task, we should see our timer widget. So we'll create a new task, we'll give it a title, test task 1, and we've got our due date up here, and you see the time's up because the due date defaults to the point where the task is being created. So let's just set that to some point in the future, and you can see I now still have 4 days and it's a nice green. Let's set it back to today, but let's make it due at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Now still have 2 hours. Let's bring that down to 12:15. I still have 11 minutes and now it's a nice orange colour. And if we set that to 05, you see the timer now starts to tick down and it's got that horrible flashy pink to red colour going on in the background for a little bit of drama. And we'll just let that tick down so that you see that it switches over to the fact that it's overdue and your time is up. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, overdue. Time's up. Okay, let's put that some point in the future. So let's put it to 12:15. Still got 10 minutes. And we'll save and close, which creates our task. And if I go back in and reopen it, you see it starts off as time's up as it was loading, but you still have 10 minutes because we have 10 minutes. Okay, so the next part that I want to do is I want to do another widget that's going to replace this form. So this is my form that lets me enter a number between 1 and 10 for each of these things, but I'm not really interested in the 10 and the 5 for the risk and the probability. What I'm interested in is the multiplication of those two together, that's 50, and if it's above a certain number, so if it's above 50, then I want to actually prevent you from saving it or something like that. But I also want to display a nice little message, and I don't want to enter numbers either. I want to use a little slider component that'll let me just drag those numbers around and see the effect. So for that, we've got another widget that I've created. I'll put all of these up on our GitHub so that you can just download them and use them if you wanted to. But again, we've got a widget manifest that's for my custom UI. And this one does have configuration because we're going to want to be able to specify what the disable threshold is. So we're going to default that to 30, but allow the user to change it. Then in my model file, I've got a couple of differences in here as well. So again, I've got my local model, which is the copy of those form builder fields. I should probably go back to that at this point. If we go to the aspects of this task and look at the risk form, you can edit the definition, and let's preview it. You can see that I'm capturing 2 fields here. Now they are going to be stored in the aspect for the form builder aspect. So all I'm actually doing is I'm creating an IDE aspect that will sit on the form, but it will read the data and manipulate the data for somebody else's aspect. Now I don't actually want this particular form builder form to appear on the form. I want this to be hidden and just replaced with mine. So I can do that by saying, going into the display properties, I still have to put the actual form builder aspect on because that's the thing that's going to load and save the data. My IDE widget is just going to be there to give me a different UI over the top of it. So to hide this risk form, I want it present. I can go into the display properties and I can either use a custom permission, a custom persona, or a matching rule that evaluates false, but something that will stop it from appearing. I'm just going to make it say it'll only appear for B2C client portal users, just for the purposes of the demo, which I know will hide it for me because I'm not that persona. And then I will add my IDE widget adapter again, and this time I'll give this a title of risk, and I'll find my risk widget, custom risk form, and you can see I can now configure that disable save threshold because I've marked it as configurable. So I'll set that to 50, so any number that's over 50 will stop me from saving it. And I'll just move that up above the due date visualizer. So I've still got my risk form on there, still got my form builder aspect, but I'm hiding that and I'm replacing it with this IDE adapter one that's going to manipulate its data on its behalf. So let's save that and go back into the IDE and I'll walk you through what this is doing. Okay, so I've got this model that's going to store the risk and probability. I've then got some computed values that works out the total risk just by multiplying the two together, and then it's going to calculate a CSS class to say whether it should be in red or whether it should be in blue. If it's over the threshold, it's going to be in red, otherwise it's going to be blue. Then I've got a total risk message that's going to say, again, if I'm over the threshold, I'm going to say can't accept this. And then the first integration to the actual aspect framework is this validation error count, which is basically saying if my total risk is above that save threshold, I'm going to return 1 from this, and that's then going to disable save on the form. I'll ignore this method for now. During the load and bind method, which is where we can now dip into the model in the host to pull data out, I'm dipping in to get the risk value and the probability value, but the way in which I do that has to be a little bit special. I've got to make sure that the aspect that I'm depending upon has its data there. So that's what this form builder method is doing. It's looking at the model that's being passed in and making sure that we have a structure that is model.aspectdata.formbuilder.formData, which is where all form builder data gets stored. You can imagine if I added my custom aspect, my custom IDE aspect on, and I didn't add a form builder component as well, my aspect data.form builder is going to be null, and I'm going to start getting errors. So all that's doing is making sure that the structure exists, so I can now dip into plucking out the risk and the probability from its payload. And similarly, when we go the other way around and the blade is going to save, it's going to call our onSave method and passes a model in to be manipulated. We'll again make sure that that model contains the aspect data that we're going to be saving back, and then we push into that the risk and probability based upon the observables that we've got in our model. And then the only other thing to mention is on the HTML, we've then got 2 inputs, which are using the range type input, which will give me a nice slider that are bound to my model's risk and probability. And then we've got a section that's just showing a div that's got that message in it and will be colored appropriately. Okay, so in theory, if I go and have a look at this task now, after it reloads its cache, I should now have my form builder is hidden. I can't see that anymore, but I do have my custom version of that form builder. I've still got my due date visualizer down here, and I can slide these around and say there's 6 out of 10 risk involved, and it is 8 out of 10 chance of happening. Now I can't remember what I set the threshold to. I think it was 50%, but if I move this up, you see once it goes over that threshold, it's gone red and all of the save buttons have been disabled. So let's set this to something that I can accept and save and close. And if I reload it, I get my values back again. 35%, still got 3 minutes, and again it won't let me save if I move these too high. And that is largely it, to be honest. So by adding that, we've got the ability, we've got kind of a bridge between what's coming in version 8, which is quite a while off, versus what we've got now, where you have to write C# code to create custom aspects. The typical use case for it is to replace Form Builder, where you want to do something fancy with Form Builder that it's not capable of doing out of the box, where you'll still add the Form Builder aspect but hide it in some way, and then create a custom IDE aspect widget, which will then visualize or manipulate that data instead of relying on the form builder UI itself. Cheers.